If you believe X, Y, and Z, are you then either explicitly or implicitly committed to believing in A, B, and C? And if you do believe them, do you believe there is an interrelationship that rigidly binds these six positions? And if this is so, are you an ideologist? Do you believe in a system of political thought that tends to comprehend all important social questions, giving the answers to all important social problems? It is commonly conceded that the word ideology began seriously with Karl Marx, who promulgated a political cosmology. But there are many other ideologues, feminists, racists, even anti-racists, perhaps even libertarians. The purpose of this hour is to explore the theory and uses of ideology, asking specifically whether there is such a thing as an ideology of conservatism. To which end we have invited Mr. Kenneth Minogue, whose latest book is called Alien Powers, The Pure Theory of Ideology. Professor Minogue is a very famous political scientist, acclaimed especially in Great Britain, where he is professor of political science at the London School of Economics. Mr. Minogue was born in New Zealand, went to the University of Sydney, and took advanced degrees from the London School of Economics. He has lectured widely in many countries, served as Dean of Undergraduate Studies at LSE, and is the author of The Liberal Mind, Nationalism, and the Concept of a University. Our examiner is Mr. Joseph Sovereign, senior editor of National Review and syndicated columnist, about whom more in due course. I'd like to begin by asking Ms. Minogue, is an ideologue, or an ideologist as you like, required to believe in an oppressor class?
I cannot imagine a proper ideologist who didn't. But there I run into an enormous difficulty. The word ideology is hard to pin down because it's a pompous, pretentious word, and people who simply want to talk about doctrines or ideas think it's flashier to talk about ideology. And therefore, anybody who believes in general principles is often described as an ideologue or an ideologist.
Improperly.
Well, how people use the word is something that you have to accept.
There's a law save usage.
You simply have to accept that. And therefore, I have had the problem in charting ideology of trying to work out where the core lies. And certainly in answering your question, I think the true ideologist undoubtedly believes in an oppressed class, because the other side of ideology is always liberation. That is, one of the ways in which you can define ideology is that it is a theory of the practice of liberation. So liberation and oppression go together.
Well, is the oppressing class necessarily animate?
Yes, it would have to be.
So the state would have to be animate then. I'm thinking of the libertarians, Herbert Spencer, Albert J. Nock et al., who think of the, and to a certain extent Milton Friedman, think of the state as the oppressor. But the state obviously is an agent of human beings, right? So it is they who are the oppressors rather than the state, in order to conform with your definitions?
The state as an oppressor is, of course, anarchist ideology. All anarchists believe that it's government that causes violence rather than the threat and fear of violence which causes government. It's characteristic, however, of most ideologists that they think that the oppressor class is half conscious of its oppressing status and half fooled by its own rationalizations. And therefore you could have government.
That's totally Orwellian, isn't it?
No, not in the least.
Well, no, Orwellian in the sense that Big Brother was at least half convinced that he was a major benevolence in 1984, right?
I rather doubt that that's what Orwell meant. I think Orwell was turning ideology itself into a melodrama. But I think one of the strengths of ideology is that it purports to be scientific. In purporting to be scientific...
pseudo-strengths.
Well, strengths in the sense of being persuasive.
Oh, yeah,
The point of ideology is it must persuade people. It is a set of ideas designed to take people up. And it is most persuasive if it appears to be scientific. And in being scientific, it's generally a theory about the essential nature of the state, or the essential nature of the capitalist class, or the essential nature of men in patriarchy. And that essential nature isn't necessarily connected to the thoughts that run through their heads. Indeed, the thoughts that run through their heads are frequently innocent or justificatory. So it's a theory independent of what the oppressor actually thinks he's doing.
Well, account, as you do in your book, but account for us the extraordinary paradox that on the one hand, ideology affects to be scientifically establishable. On the other hand, empirical data are at war with ideological presuppositions. The most obvious example of this, I would guess, would be agriculture in the Soviet Union. People know that in a free agricultural system there's usually abundance. The Soviet Union exported grain up until 1917, has had droughts every year since. Now, given that they simultaneously need to search out scientific truths and are bombarded by empirical results that contradict those truths they seek out, how is it that they manage?
Now that's a very complicated question. In Popperian terms, of course, a scientific theory has to be refutable. It has to be a set of, Karl Popper believes quite rightly that a scientific theory has to be a set of propositions which you can go out into the world and test. You can say, is the world a bit like that? And you can be proved wrong. An ideology is obviously not like that. It's a set of propositions which are very carefully insulated from testing.
A priori.
A priori, yes. Marx invented the notion of scientific socialism, and I think that when we talk about ideology, it's always best to take one's bearings from Marx, because he's undoubtedly the genius who created this highly special form of thought. And as he came into political controversy in the 1840s, the best grip he could take upon it was to say, other socialists or communists have merely been advocates of utopias, of an ideal society. I am presenting to you a theory, and the theory is scientific socialism, so that for most of Marx's lifetime, the claim was made that Marxism was scientific socialism. It's made by Engels, for example, at the graveside address. But the true logic of ideology, as I've tried to argue in Alien Powers, is that the ideology must be a total revelation which gets behind everything that modern society produces. And therefore the development of, say, Marxist ideology in the last 100 years has included criticism of science as being part of the technocratic, instrumental rationalism of a capitalist society, so that ideology eventually has to present itself as a body of knowledge which is transparent and superior to science, philosophy, religion, to all other ideas whatsoever.
Well, would an application of this point lead the ideologist, the Marxist, to say, I can account for the productivity of free agriculture here in exactly equivalent geographical circumstances and the lack of productivity here by using a scientific knowledge that transcends the knowledge on which these empirical data are otherwise received. If so, how does he accomplish that?
Well, obviously, I don't think he can, and you don't think he can either. It can't be done. And it's very complicated to explain.
But he has to be persuasive.
He has to
I know it can't be done in the sense that you and I would rule that he had come through with an objectively defensible performance. How does he attempt to do it?
I'll tell you what he would do. What he would say is that the essence of capitalism is that it is a crazy, out-of-control, productive system which is always producing, it's spilling vast numbers of surpluses onto the market and dominating the minds of people so that they acquire false needs, so that they'll gobble them up. But if you look at American agriculture, currently it's overproducing. The common market is overproducing in agriculture. Now, there may indeed be certain technical problems about socialist agriculture because we are in the midst of building a socialist society, and perhaps human beings under socialism have not yet acquired that sense of communal loyalty which allows us to produce food adequate to the needs of the people. Perhaps not quite, but we are at least building a rational system, whereas this is merely part of the weird